My guest today is Christopher K Wallace. He's a men's counsellor, author, father, and husband. Chris and I delve into a vast array of topics, including Chris's colourful background, including dealing drugs, being shot in the chest with a crossbow, and conceiving his son in prison, the moral and scientific arguments around chatting a woman up in a bar after she's had a drink, how to tap into your inner essence and become aware of your value to the world, why drinking alcohol is an addiction to fear, how alcohol degrades your confidence and how to cultivate it intrinsically, how and why you should trace emotional responses in the body back to childhood, his mission of fighting societal male weakness, what masculine destiny means, why strengths can be perceived as weaknesses, the nervous system and the process of affect, how to become aware of the predictive brain and override autopilot, how desire and fear interact and the riddle of addiction, and Chris's message to the world's male population. As you can see from the selection of topics above, this is a conversation packed with tons of insights. Chris is such an interesting guy, original thinker. I really hope you get something from this one. Although Chris's work is primarily directed at men, I do believe the ladies out there will get something from this too. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Christopher K Wallace. Hey everyone, just a quickie before we get into the conversation. The podcast is always going to be free, so I'm never going to ask you to pay for anything. But if you could do me the kindness of subscribing and maybe leaving a review, that would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Chris, tell me what's brought you to where you are today.
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends on what sphere of my life I'm 66 years old. So
let's run right through. Come on, give me a whistle stop tour. The highlights and the lowlights.
I came from a big naval officer's family, 9 children, 10 pregnancies in 12 years, brought up in a 3-bedroom bungalow. Dad was a reformed drinker, so he quit drinking, but he was a kind of he bounced between weakness and tyranny. And then once in a while he rose up and was a king. You know, I have a half a dozen pretty good memories of him. I was out of the house at 15. And then I did a series of jobs, fell into, started to hang around the wrong people. And this was the 70s, and so drug dealing was paramount, was everywhere, and so I became a drug dealer and on and so forth, and then I became this gangster guy, and so I did that until I was in my 30s, and in my 30s I married a girl to look good in front of a judge. I thought that would look good if I went before the courts, and I had just been married. We had a child. He was conceived in prison during a visit, and we had a child. And when he was 2, I'd just been shot, and I was contemplating having to go back and take care of this asshole that shot me. And this little 2-year-old crawled across the floor and pulled himself up on his daddy and was looking at the TV. And I saw him there, and I had an epiphany. I realized that this was the only person I knew that didn't have any enemies. This little blonde-haired, blue-eyed, sweet little boy. And that it was my job to protect him. Because if I went off and did what I was planning to do, exact retribution for having been shot through the chest and pinned to the wall with a crossbow arrow, beaten with a baseball bat, broke my arm. I was probably going to get caught, and I'd probably have to do some time. And where would this little boy be? So I had an epiphany. It was as if the skies opened up and reached out and gave me a little shake there on the couch. I had a big cast on, and I realized that fell to me. It was my job to protect him. Somehow I'd missed that,
Tell me a little bit more about when you were shot, and what led to that.
Well, it was I don't want to, it was my wife at the time had done something that was not okay with these people. And I won't get into particulars about that out of respect for her. She's deceased and I don't want to, sully her that way. But that started something unbeknownst to me. And so all of a sudden I was seen as the bad guy. So I was shot. It went over and was talking with them, and suddenly I got a baseball bat over the back of the head, one of those little short billy bats, and I fell down and I blocked it the next shot with my arm, which broke it, and on and so forth. And anyways, I got out of that situation. I was pinned to his cupboard with a crossbow arrow, and then I did something really silly. Then I got a little mad and I pulled it out and I threw it at him because I was so incensed that you would actually do that with me. And then air started to hiss out of my lung. And so I stuck my finger in there and I'm giving him shit. Meanwhile, he took the arrow I threw back at him and reloaded. So now I'm thinking, oh, well, that was dumb. And he made a call to somebody. He says, I caught myself the wolf. I caught myself a wolf. That was one of my nicknames on the street. And so this other guy showed up, who's like a little bit above him in the hierarchy, and asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, I'm fine. And he had a little powwow with him, and he said, you get out of here. And so I left with my finger stuck in this hole and my arm kind of broken. And I stumbled across, and I had a buddy waiting around the corner in a Lincoln Continental. And I jumped in his car and I said, let's go. Let's go. And I was having trouble breathing. He thought I was overamping on cocaine. He was saying, where's the stuff? And I said, shot. So he dropped me off at the hospital and said, you understand, I'm not coming in. I rolled out of his car. All these guys in white came running out, out of the hospital emergency door, the sliding doors, and picked me up and threw me on a stretcher. Soon, and then they got a bag on me, and they punctured my lung. It started to drain the blood and on and so forth, and they saved my life. So now, a week or so later, I'm sitting at home contemplating how I'm going to go back and exact revenge, and this little boy walks across the floor or crawls across the floor, pulls himself up on me, and I have this epiphany. I said, what the hell are you fucking doing, Wallace? It's your job to protect him. He's the only person that doesn't have any enemy. If you go off and do this, what's going to happen to him? He's going to get, everybody's going to be chasing his mother for her. She was an extraordinarily good looking girl, trying to fill her full of cocaine, and you'll be in prison. And where's he going to be? He's going to be shunted aside. And I said, I can't do it to him. So I made a decision. I said, you know what? We're not doing this anymore. And I went down and tried to get into this hospital for drug treatment. They refused me. I had a red file. They call it a red file. I was known for violence. And so they wouldn't let me in. And then there was this little old doctor, Dr. Hamad. She was about 5 foot tall. And she came down with my file in front of her. It was this red file. And she said, you've been here several times looking for help, and we never help you. I'm going to take a chance on you. And she let me in. And I went through withdrawal. I got off of the heroin and all the rest of it. And then I went through the treatment programs, and then I went back to school, and I never looked back. And the guy who shot me, about 2 years later, I had gone through college. 3 years later, maybe, I'd gone through college, but he did the same thing to somebody else and threatened to kill their families. And that guy walked into the pool hall and shot him dead and walked away. And that guy got life. I was free.
Wow.
And so I moved across the country. I had my boy with me. And when he was 18, I said to him, listen, from what they tell me, it's probably cost me 150, 200 grand to raise you all this time. I had read that there was an average that you spend on a child. And I said, you're 18 now. I said, I don't owe you anything. My obligation to you as a father in terms of looking after you and on and so forth, that's finished today. Anything that I do
What
for
year is
you.
that? What year is this?
Oh, geez, that's he was 18, so that's in the 90s. That's in the mid 90s, and it was 83, 84 when I quit. And then I went to college for 2 or 3 years, but it was in the 90s. And I said to him, I'm done. I've fulfilled my obligation as a father. And he was a little confused at first. And he said to me, he said, Dad, he said, Mom looked after me. She made me lunches. She cleaned my clothes. She picked me up from school and dropped me off from school. And she was wonderful. But he said, everything I ever learned about myself, about people, about life, I learned from you. So thank you. And he kissed me both cheeks. He said, I love you. And that was my pay. That was his gratitude for I had done a decent job as a father. And he's 40. He lives in Ireland. He just bought a house. He's married. We're still tight. And it worked out fine. It was it. Forget about it. Right?
Yeah. So let me just tap into a few things. So did you say this was New York? Did I pick that up, or have I?
No, it was Ottawa.
Where did you?
Ottawa.
Ottawa.
Feels like a New York story, eh?
Yeah, it does sound very New York.
They were all Italians.
And you said you were driving across the country. Where were you going? Where were you moving? What?
Well, I went
18?
across. I lived at that time. I was in British Columbia. I lived in Vancouver. I had left Ottawa, had gone to college, a couple of different universities, Hamilton, and I was living out on the West Coast at that time. And when he turned 18, so I guess, let me see, he was born in 83, so it had to be 91 when he turned 18, and we had that talk, and I raised him.
That's awesome. When you say you had that particular, the way you said it, like I fulfilled my obligation as a father now.
Mm-hmm.
Were you saying it like, it sounds like quite final? What is it? What was it about?
It confused him.
The way that you said it. Yeah.
I wanted him to know that he was 18 now, and that anything that we did going forward would be based on moral persuasion. I'd learned the term moral persuasion, and I thought, well, that would be a better basis for our relationship rather than just a father-son obligation. I'm your parent, and so I am duty bound to look after you. I wanted us to move to a different level in our relationship. To have a relationship.
So moral persuasion being more like a level playing field. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like we'll do things for each other because we want to now, not because we have to. You see, I didn't want to just be his father.
Interesting use of language, but I see the depth of it now.
Yeah.
Can we rewind a little bit? Because you sort of said that, in the 70s, lots of people were selling drugs, etc. I'm interested in the key moments and steps that happened for you to, let's say, sell your first, I don't know, what is it, a wrap of heroin? I don't know how I don't know how you deliver it.
Yep.
Were there some, what's the key moments?
It wasn't, we just sort of fell into it. It was everybody was doing it back then, and anybody who was on the outs with their parents, sort of congregated at the same homes, and sort of hashish, and there wasn't even that much cannabis around. It was mainly hashish, and then it was harder drugs, a lot of LSD.
And was this a working class background, a poor background, a middle class? What
I would say middle class. I would say middle class.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
father was a naval officer, even though we had 9 kids, but we were in the suburbs of Ottawa. And,
Mm.
I'm out on my own. And it was funny that I didn't expect to talk about any of this stuff. Glover did the same thing to me, that guy. But it's funny, but all later on, when I was studying behavioral sciences and I was looking at, well, how did I get here? I had 2 older brothers. There's 5 boys in the family, 2 older, 2 younger. And I would do anything for my 2 older brothers. I would follow them anywhere. They're my 2 older brothers. And I realized later on that what I was doing by slowly being absorbed into this whole drug culture is I was looking for my older brothers, because I always ended up hanging around guys who were the players in those scenes. And I was looking for my 2 older brothers. I was one of those guys who, if you challenged me and said, Chris, we need you to do this, boom, it's done. And so I was ripe
Mm.
for to be persuaded that way or to be influenced that way. And so I turned various guys who were maybe not who had their own issues, but they were gangsters. I turned them into my older brothers, and that's what I was replacing. And of
And
course,
would I be right in saying, because I know you said you had a an inconsistent relationship with your father? Would that be fair to
right?
say?
Yes.
So were you like your brothers were like a surrogate in place for your father as well?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I became a bit of a thug, and I carried a gun for many years, and I was arrested for shooting someone, and I did time for that. And, I became, and as I studied behavioral science and learned more and more about how, I operated back then, I realized I was protecting myself from my father. That's why I did that, I think. I think that was my underlying motivation, was to make myself strong enough so that my father couldn't hurt me. My father was violent. He had good intentions, but he came from a different era. And, they beat you with a hockey stick handle, at 7 or 8 years old, 70 or 80 swings, full adult swings from an adult male on a 7 or 8-year-old kid's bare ass. After 30, you fall down, you plead, please, daddy, stop hitting me. Get up. More. I got the family record for that. So,
Wow.
So that sort of thing.
Were you sorry, you said, was it 10 siblings and you had 2 older brothers? So were you kind of like one of the oldest?
I'm in the middle of a family of 11.
Right in
There's
the
9
middle.
children. Yeah, right in the middle of a family of 11. 2 older brothers, 1 older sister, and then younger brothers and sisters below me. And
Yeah.
and so and my father later told me that he thought I was the most sensitive of them all. And I resisted saying to him, well, maybe it's just because you beat me the worst. You know what I mean? But I didn't say that to him.
It's an interesting sort of topic, this, because sensitivity, attachment styles, trauma, and there is, if you look at like something like attachment theory, it's almost a little bit simplistic, and it's like, well, okay, for example, it might be my parent was emotionally unavailable, therefore I became needy, and it's like, okay, so all that being said, does it still just come down to genetics in terms of how I responded? Were you always going to be sensitive to? Does that make
Right.
sense? Or was it
Yeah.
because of the violence that made you sensitive?
It's
I think that's
interesting.
really
Yeah.
difficult to pass out.
Well, I think you're you arrive here with an inborn temperament. You have certain, talents that are already, sprinkled upon you by the stars, as I like to say. But you're 50% internal and 50% relational. Those are shaped by the environment, by the people in the environment, especially the mother. And when you look at the history of attachment over the last, not even 100 years, Bowlby's famous UK guy who was at the forefront of that, the mother's influence is pretty strong. And so, you arrive with these inborn temperaments and these proclivities, methyl groups, activating your various chromosomes depending on your circumstances. For example, we know that they discovered that kids in Israel whose grandparents had been through the Holocaust had a greater tendency to suffer from anxiety. So this is the methyl groups that activate chromosomes. So you run into something in the environment, the body adapts to it, and then that lasts 2 or 3 or 4 generations. And if you don't need it anymore, it dies out. If you still need that, well, that becomes a more or less permanent trait. So you're very much, relationally and environmentally shaped.
Methyl groups, did you say it was called?
Methyl groups, yes. I'm not a neuroscientist,
methyl groups, so
but that's what activates the chromosomes. So if you move to a northern climate and the cold acts upon your body, and you're originally from the Middle East or Africa, it may change your chromosomes may adapt so that you can handle more cold. So maybe you put on more fat.
DNA expression.
Yeah.
Like an expression of DNA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us. So we went up to 1980s. You brought up your son. You're then studying at this point, right?
I went through drug and alcohol treatment, and then I went back to school because I didn't even have a high school. I was out when I was 15. So as I was studying for high school, I ran into this teacher who was from Canada's north. She had taught on native reserves up in the Yukon and Northwest Territories for most of her career, and she was right at the end of it. And she just was wonderful. She was this short little, not a very attractive lady, just this little stout thing, but she encouraged me. She said, "You can write." And so I did all the English for high school in about 6 weeks. And then I still had the math and the science to do to get the equivalents. And then while I was working on the math and science, I applied in the behavioral science department, and they turned me down. They said, "You don't even have a high school. Forget about it." And so then I went back, and she said, "Well, would you like to do the college Englishes too? Because I have access to those. I'm a teacher here, So I did all those over the summer. I did 3 of the college English, and I scored, really good marks. And I went back to the people in the admissions or in my department, the behavioral science department, and I pestered them, and I did aptitude tests, and I got letters from people in the community saying that I would make a good counselor, and so finally she got fed up with me, and she said, "We'll put you on the waiting list." And so then I went down, but I knew all the girls in the admissions office by then. So I went down. I told them. She said, "Hey," and it was in French, and I said, "I'm on the waiting list apparently." She said, "We'll move you to the top." So I got in. I didn't even have a high school. And then I graduated first in my class and won the Academic Council Award and beat out like 115 other kids in that program. when I graduated. And so then I went on to a couple of universities and kept studying. But I had an affinity for it. I never knew I did, So that was kind of a wonderful experience.
And so were you what, like in your 30s, 40s at this point? What I'm trying to.
I was in my 30s. Yeah, I was in my
Yeah.
30s. Yeah, I was 33, 34, 35 when I got out of the life, and then I went to college, and so I was finished by the time I was 40. But then I've always kept. I'm registered at a couple of universities now, so doing distance courses. So I'm always got my fingers in it, my hands in it a little bit. You can't see my office, but it's floor to ceiling books, So
Awesome. And so that brought you to doing counseling.
yes.
What type of counseling is it?
Well, I started doing addictions counseling because that's what I had come through. And back then, of course, when you counseled a male, they were scared shitless of counselors. So I came up with this great idea. I said, you had a coach in high school for football, for soccer, for baseball, for swimming, whatever you did, just call me your coach. And so I called myself a coach back then. But then Tony Robbins made everybody in the world a coach, bless his heart. So now I call myself the advisor to men because I work strictly with men. And back then I didn't think I was mature enough to be able to counsel people about their marriages and on and so forth. I was still only in my 30s and I was still making my own way. And so I taught what I knew. So I worked as an addictions counselor at a couple of residential facilities. I continued to study with the Addiction Research Foundation in Toronto. I'd go down and take their courses, and I did a bunch of stuff like that. And then it doesn't pay any money, so I went off into business. But I've always counseled and mentored on the side for all that time. But I ended up in the newspaper business eventually. And I did paid circulation. So I ran sales teams, and I had 7 different offices and about 150, 180 people reporting to me, about 15, 20 managers. And I did that for a number of years too, until the iPad came out. And once the iPad came out, writing was on the wall for print newspapers. And so by 2015, it was really starting to become dire. And then I gave it up. And I've been a counselor ever since. Mm-hmm.
What led you into kind of like the salesy world from like this, counseling? You said you were doing a bit of writing, and then
Right.
you end up in kind of like a bit of a corporate kind of job.
It's interesting. In the 70s, I did door-to-door sales in magazines, and it changed my life because you learn to talk to anybody. You knock on their
Yeah.
doors, they're having supper, and you've got to somehow strike up a conversation. So I learned that, and I wasn't the best in the company or anything like that, but I was good enough. And so I did that while I was in the 70s, when I was 16, 17, even to 18. But then by then I morphed over under into the drug dealing world and all of that for the next decade and a half or so.
And right now, what's your mission? What's what does your kind of week ordinary look like in terms of the different things you're involved in?
Well, now you're talking about something that I'm more familiar with speaking with. My mission, of course, is to empower men. I think the biggest problem that we have in the world today is male weakness. I think that we have probably a 200-year capitalistic externality, which sees men overmothered and underfathered. And that's got dire consequences for the whole world right now. The society has become very feminized. And so my mission is to help men be men.
you use the term masculine destiny. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very interesting use of words. Tell me about that.
Well, you're going right for the good stuff. You know, I think that I think people have gotten away from, see, 200 years ago, Jason, we all would have lived on the equivalent of the family farm. You would have had both grandparents, you would have had uncles, you would have had your father, you would have had your brothers, you would have had your cousins. Everybody would have been around you, and you would have had access to 20 or 30 males who you could get a little piece of something from each of them, because we're eclectic humans. And ever since the Victorian era, men have left home and gone to work somewhere and then returned. Whereas before, your family was always with you. If you were a tailor, your children worked in your tailor shop. If you were a wagon maker, your children worked alongside you in your wagon making shop. If you were a farrier, if you were a grocer, your children were with you. That was always the way it was. And that's how we've evolved over the tens of thousands of years, is to be brought up by a man and a woman and a whole series of helpers. In anthropology, they call it alloparents, where you have all of these other people. And that's what brings people up. And we've lost that over the generations, every generation more and more and more. Now you have a situation where children are brought up primarily by the mother while the father is out of the home. And now capitalism, bless its heart, it does wonderful things, and it was necessary. But this is an unforeseen consequence to capitalism. Now we even want women to leave the home and let the state raise your children in daycares and primary schools and on and so forth. This is unnatural. This is not how humans are made to be brought up. So that has consequences. That's part of it. But masculine destiny for me is that, well, there's 500 million or a billion sperm vying for the egg on the day that you were conceived. That's a pretty astronomical number. Why is it that you were chosen as opposed to one of those other possibilities? Now you could say, well, it's luck, but now you're playing God. You're coming up with an answer that you don't have an answer for. You don't really know. It's a mystery. But nature chose you over all of these other possibilities. And so that has to be respected. Why did nature choose you? Well, you had something. You have something. And all of us have certain strengths that are sort of sprinkled upon us by the stars, by heavens of infinite wisdom. And our job is to take those and learn to recognize them, say, hey, hang on a minute. I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at that. And use those somehow and strengthen them, like taking stone to steel, sharpen those talents into strengths and use those to make a positive difference. That's everybody's purpose in life. Everybody's, no exceptions. And life simplifies when all you have to think of is, how can I make a positive difference today? I don't care if it's the lady across the hall, the person in the elevator, somebody that you meet at a bus stop. From there, how can I make a positive difference? How can I light somebody up using one of my talents today? And that's all of our jobs. That's our obligation under the skies, not because we can, not just because we can, and not because we want to, though we should want to, because it's what we owe. That's what we owe for life. Our job is to take whatever was given to us by nature and to use that to grow and to manifest. An oak tree is a beautiful example of my favorite tree. It doesn't grow into a sapling. A squirrel puts a seed into the ground, for an acorn for winter, and it grows into this little sapling. Well, it doesn't stop there. Its intention, it's programmed into that into that acorn to grow into this 300-year-old magnificent oak tree with 17 birds' nests in it and children climbing through it and making forts and somebody sitting underneath it in its shade reading a book. That's what that oak tree's intention is. Well, why would it be any different for any living being? Why would it be different for us? You're supposed to become everything Jason can become. I'm supposed to become everything Christopher Wallace can become. And use that to somehow make a positive difference around, to be part of that mix. That's our obligation under the skies, under the stars, under the heavens, because the universe doesn't make mistakes. It just is. It doesn't make mistakes. So we're all supposed to be here. If we're here, we're supposed to be here. And we're supposed to be manifesting our talent somehow to make a difference. That's everybody's obligation. It's everybody's purpose until you find your place in the sun, like that oak tree finds its place in the sun and grows into this magnificent tree. Each one of us does that. We take our talents, we sharpen them into strengths, we use them to make a positive difference around us until we find our place in the sun. And we may do that several times in a lifetime if we're lucky. But that's all of our jobs. That makes sense?
Yeah, that was really beautiful. Thank you. I think I love that, by the way, because I said this in the past, actually, kind of as a bit of a joke, but if you're ever feeling insecure or like you're not enough, I would use that same thing. Like, just think of like the chances of you winning that race, that sperm race.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing. So like, yeah, fuck yeah, well done.
Yeah. Well, we're all chosen ones, Jason. You know, they say the Jews are the chosen ones. What do you mean? We're all chosen. We were all chosen by heavens of infinite wisdom. Infinite wisdom. Limitless. You know, that's what brought you here. It's what brought me here. It's what brought your listeners to where they are. And it's our job to recognize that, not cower from this, not retreat from it, but to say, I was chosen. I'm supposed to be here. How can I take whatever little meager talents I have and use those to make a positive difference, to do good somehow? Well, life simplifies at that point, you know?
Yeah, and it's something I've been thinking about just recently is this whole social comparison world that we live in. We've always had social comparison, of course, but now because of Instagram and social media and all the rest of it, it's both, and podcasts, by the way, you know, and I think these are amazing things. Like, I'm inspired by podcasters and people on social media, and it makes me want to do things better because I can see, you know, the top 1% of people around the globe doing what I want to do. But then the close cousin to that is the negative association and comparison that comes with that. Like, fucking hell, like, look how jacked this guy is, look how rich this guy is. And it's something to think about a lot. Or not a lot, but just recently it seems to be like something I've been sort of toying with. And it's like, how can we use that as inspiration to, like, you know, use the tools that are available to all these podcasts and amazing knowledge that's out there, but then be reminded of like where you are. Like, if I compare myself to the top 1% of podcasters, I'm nowhere. But then if I go, well, what about podcasters in Ulverston, where I live, is a little town where I live? I'm probably the only podcaster in Ulverston. Wow. You know, like, so when I like compare it like that, I'm like, okay, so out of, I don't know, like 16,000, I don't know, maybe 50,000, I can't remember. Like, all right, maybe the only one. That's kind of cool.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent there, but
that's fine.
I'll bring it home in terms of, you were talking about using your gifts, and this is what it reminded me. Like, yeah, just tapping into that is it's never been so easy and it's never been so hard,
Mm.
right?
You bring up important points because the idea of, and you started off by talking about social comparison, and you think about that when you're like a year and a half, 2 years old, you're bouncing around the living room and you don't give a shit about anything. You don't care. You're this little creature, this intuitive. Like my son, when he crawled across the floor and then sat up on his daddy's belly and started watching TV, sucking his thumb at a year and a half, 2 years old. He didn't give a shit. He wasn't making judgments. He was just this darling little boy, this little innocent. So he's this creative, intuitive, exploratory, curious little guy, and then you're at that stage, and then mom says, Jason, stop shitting here. Shit in the potty. All right. Stop throwing your food on the floor. Keep it up on your high chair. You got to go to sleep now. You got to get up. Don't do this. Don't do that. And it starts with toilet training and it goes on from there. And you're told what to do. The average child is told, 6,000-7,000 times what to do every year. And what do parents do? They use language. So a parent has two jobs. Number one, keep you alive. If the mother has decided to keep you, if you make it to birth, and in the old days, a woman would go into the woods, into the forest, and have the child. And if she had too many children at home and she didn't think she'd be able to feed that child, she would abandon it to the elements and the animals, either the forest or the jungle. And that seems like, the horror people worry about, the abortion debate and on and so forth. But it was always a woman's prerogative, And so if you made it past that, because that's when the greatest sales job on the planet occurs, when the baby convinces the mother to look after it, and it cries and it coos and it clutches and it smells. She smells. All the women tell me about newborn baby smell. I forget it. I've seen 3 of my children being born. I don't remember the smell. All the women do. Oh, that newborn baby smell they tell me about. So you make it through that stage. Her job is then to keep you alive. And she has that. That's the main job. Don't die on my watch, kid. Second job, socialize you. And for selfish reasons. Because if she can socialize you, then you won't bring shame on her. You don't make her look bad. You don't affect her standing amongst the tribe. And you hear parents say this, don't bring shame on the family. And so they socialize you so that you're not a little asshole. And then that has a secondary benefit, because if you're not a little asshole, other people may actually try to keep you alive too. So you come into the tribe that way. And how does she do that? She uses language. She tells you to do this, do that, do this, do that. And she gives you all of these commands. And so you've got that goes somewhere in your brain, and usually in the left brain, and 95% of people, you've got a great guy over there, Gilchrist, who wrote The Master and His Emissary. Beautiful book. He's a psychiatrist. You don't have to read the book. I mean, he's a UK writer. And so there's a comma like every third fucking word. Drives you nuts reading it, but it's a good book. And so one of those kind of writers, but it's really good stuff. And he makes that point. And so that gets installed in that left brain, and it's full of judgment. What if only, how do I compare against everybody else? But that's not who you really are. You were chosen by life, by heavens of infinite wisdom for life. You're this exploratory, intuitive, curious, creative being, you see, and we get away from that. and we start comparing ourselves to everybody else. And that's moms and primary grades. It's the people around you who install that conforming. Jung called it the conforming ego. They install that in you as a child. It's not the real you. The real you is that talented, creative, intuitive person. So we want to speak to that part of you. You know, we just want to make a positive difference every day. We want to use our talents for good somehow. And all the rest of that means nothing. You see?
And how do you teach? How do you show men how to tap into that that essence, that inner essence?
Well, it's a good idea to learn your talents, and you know it as soon as you have a doubtful comment, a should, would, could, what if only, but in your mind. That's the servant part of your two hemispheres. You have two hemispheres so that when you're doing one thing, the other hemisphere can keep an idea, is focused on the big picture. If you have a chicken or a pigeon and it picks up a grain of a seed off the ground, it's vulnerable to attack by predators at that point. So it has a second hemisphere, which keeps an eye on the surroundings, and so you have two hemispheres for a reason. One is the master hemisphere. This is where your possibilities are, your potential, your promise. And that's usually in the right hemisphere for males, for 95% of us. And then you have the left hemisphere, which governs the right side of the body. That's the servant hemisphere, where the analytical, the judgmental, the should, would, could, what if only, but. So as soon as you go into any of those, oh, well, that's not the real me. That I'm sort of manifesting at that point what Freud would call the superego. It's the voices of my parents, the voices of my teachers, the voices of my older siblings telling me what to do, that were installed in me for survival and sociability reasons. And it's sociable right away because you're comparing yourself to other people. You see? So you have to bust yourself
When we
on
look
that.
at, so this left and right hemisphere, you said the left is the servant, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that left?
Yeah.
And then the right is your kind of essence, your playfulness, your
creative, intuitive, exploratory, curious. It understands language, but it speaks in flashes of insight and emotion. See?
How do those areas relate to like the amygdala, so like the emotional center, and like the prefrontal cortex, the how would you say, the control center? Like, are they independent? Like, what's going on there?
Oh, they influence each other, don't they? Like, I'm not a neuroscience
why do you think it's
guy, but I do know that this shows up in our behavior, and how you can counter that. If you're under the should, would, could, what if only, but, you're definitely under your servant self. And the servant self thinks it knows it. McGilchrist from the UK makes the point that he says the servant self thinks that it knows everything. So it's like having the master of the house, and it gives certain duties, certain jobs to the servants. And the servants start to they go on an ego trip and think, well, I know what I'm doing, so I think I'm the boss. No. Got to take that back. You need that for a period of time. You need to listen to mom. You take a 3-year-old kid, it'll walk across the street until you install abandonment fear in it and tell it, if you don't look both ways before you cross the street, you could get run over by a car. What would happen to me, mommy? Well, you would die, and that would make mommy really sad. I would never see you again. Well, you've just installed abandonment fear in the child. You have to. It's unavoidable. Hold my hand in the parking lot. Why, mommy? Because a car could back up. You're only small. They may not see you. And they could run you over. What would happen to me? Well, they'd squish you and you'd die. I'd never see you again. That would make mommy really sad. You just installed abandonment fear in the child. What are you going to do? Tell them, no, it's okay? Don't hold my hand? Scamper along? No, we have to. This is unavoidable, right? So we want to at some point reconcile that and go, okay, how much of that is installed survival and sociability to help me assimilate into the tribe and keep me alive? And how much of this is my masculine destiny, my talents, my creative, intuitive, exploratory, curious side, my potentials, my possibilities, my promise under the blue skies? You have to make a differentiation between those two.
What would you say to someone who may be listening, or if they come into your practice and say, I don't have any talents, I'm stupid, I've never done well, I've always been average to below average. How do you help those guys?
I test them. I assess them. I got a series of assessments that I make them do. And then I go, aha. Because everybody's got
Can you give
talents.
me some examples of what
the first assessment I get people to do is I get them to take a locus of control. Can I act upon my life? And so we do that. Another thing I always get people to do the Big Five personality. I think that's an important background piece of information. I get people to take the positive intelligence saboteur assessments, because that'll tell you what your could, would, should, what if, all of the judgments that you make all the time are regularly.
What's that second one called? The
positive intelligence saboteur assessment. It's free. You can find it online at positiveintelligence.com. I make them take that.
And so what's that one? And what would that sort of information? You said the should, would, could.
It'll tell you what style of judgments you use against yourself. Am I a hyper rational? Am I a stickler? Am I a hyper achiever? Am I an avoider? Am I a victim? There's 9 of them in all. And so you take a good look at those. Then I have you do your strengths by the Gallup Strength Finders organization. I've been a Gallup strength coach for years and years. And then you compare the two and you realize something. All of your saboteurs, all of this judgment are perverted strengths. You've taken something good about you and you've turned it into a negative through this filter, through this conforming ego filter, the should, would, could, what if only, but survival and sociability filter. And it stops people in their tracks. So now you have to retrain yourself.
Could you just give me an example of how that would work? So an example of a strength that then turns into a perceived weakness.
Well, you may have somebody who's got a strength to connect with other people, and his saboteur strength. Let me see if I can pull one up and even show it to you. So you get somebody who does the saboteur assessments, and there's 9 of them. They're all judgmental. They're all forms of judgment that we use, and they're installed in us as kids, and they're reinforced by the way that we respond. So the 9 of them are the stickler, the controller, the restless part of us, the hyperachiever, the hyper-rational, the hyper-vigilant, the pleaser, and the victim. So you get somebody who's a real stickler. He's always kind of like nothing. He's a perfectionist, right? But then you go over and you look at his Clifton strengths and you find out that his number 1 strength is achiever. He brings intensity and effort to the most important areas of his life, but he skews that into stickler. into controller makes him restless. You see? Right? So he actually perverts this wonderful strength that he have to be an achiever, or to bring intensity and effort to the most important areas of his life. He perverts those into stickler, controller, restless. I can't show you this, but you get somebody whose ideation is another strength. It's a person who refines his creativity to inspire and energize yourself and others. He again can pervert that into stickler, controller, restless, hyperachiever. He perverts it.
So it's kind of like the shadow, right?
Shadow is parts of yourself that you hide from others. You know, you would never share with others. You know, that's what the shadow is. And of course, when we deny that the shadow exists, it shows up. So the shadow is a little bit different, you know.
Yeah.
But so when it comes to masculine destiny, it's funny how you zeroed in on that, because I help people with relationships and I help people with addictions to solve the riddle of addiction. But this is something that I usually solve those other two issues, and then we move into this. And as they move into this, they get better and better at honoring themselves and realizing that they were chosen for life, that they're not just some accident of nature, that there's a reason for here. They have something to offer. And, you know, guys who come to me and who say, well, I'm not really special, I don't have very much. Well, that's just the victim. You know, that's a perverted strength speaking. So then we do your strengths panel, and then we go, aha, what's this? You know, and then I let them see how they've perverted their strength into a saboteur, into this judgment, into this conforming ego. What if? And it's all survival and socialization based, and it's generally installed in you as a kid, and then it's reinforced as time goes on. You're run by your nervous system, and your conscious awareness is along for the ride. So what happens is you take in information from the external. If is it night, is it day, is it sunny out, is it raining, is it windy? There's a difference between walking down the street of your small town versus walking down the street of New York or South Chicago or even London in a bad part of town at 2 a.m. There's a fucking difference. The environment counts, you know? So you take in that external information, and that registers through your senses in the body. Then in the body, did I have a good night's sleep? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? People talk about being hangry, you know, and they haven't eaten for hours, right? The ghrelin hormone rises. And then they eat and they feel satiated, and the ghrelin hormone subsides and the leptin hormone takes over. So am I hungry? Do I have to take a piss? Am I coming down with a cold? Do I have seasonal allergies? All of those internal factors mix with that environmental influence, and it creates something called affect. And affect is simply the simplest way to describe it. Am I comfortable or am I uncomfortable? Am I aroused or am I relaxed? And then that information gets sent upstairs to the brainstem through the vagus nerve, because the brain exists to serve the body, not the other way around. And we didn't roll out of Africa on a brain and then grow a body. We walked out of Africa, and then our brain has evolved since. So it sends that information up to the brain, and then the brain, 7 different emotional mechanisms, hits the periaqueductal gray in the brain stem, and then the brain takes that information and compares it to your data bank of prior experiences all the way back to birth. Various concepts that you've formed over life. Like if I say car, you know what a car is. You have a concept for car. You might think of a white one. I might think of a black one, but we both understand generally what car is, right? But it's not going to be identical. So now we use those concepts, and then the brain puts that forth and says, Jason, it must be this. Puts forth a best guess, a hypothesis. And the way you can prove this is sometimes at some point in your life, you will have overheard a conversation and you would have gotten pissed off. What the fuck are those people saying about me? And you listen a little more carefully and you realize they're not even talking about you. Or when I go to my window in the morning and I think, I wonder if the freaking red squirrels have eaten all my old bird feed out of my bird feeder. And I'll go and look and I'll see a fucking red squirrel right there. And I'll look away and I'll look back and it's not there at all. I saw it though. And I know there's a bear that lives back there in the 200 acres that I live on. I know there's one back there because guys have seen them on the cameras, on the trail cameras. And I'll go back and I'll look for a bear and I'll see a bear and then I'll look again. No, it's just a shadow caused by some hedges, some bush out there. And so that's the predictive brain. The brain, this is worth the price of admission, realizing that the brain is not reactive. It's predictive. And it uses your data bank of prior experiences, concepts formed from your data bank of prior experiences all the way back since birth, and puts forth this best guess, this hypothesis in the moment, and then you confirm or deny it according to the social reality before you. But the problem is that people believe what they think and feel. No, those are guesses based on your history. But this has another wonderful aspect to it too, because it means if you feel something today, you've felt it before. You see? You feel something today. There's nothing new to a predictive brain. You know, you can go to the ocean for the first time and the brain goes, oh yeah, Jason, we've seen big water. You can see the mountains. Go to the Alps for the first time and the brain says, yeah, we've seen hills. It's comparing everything to what you've seen before, what you've experienced before, constantly, over and over and over again, in milliseconds. Right. So it's like, so we need to understand that.
If you see something, hear something, smell something, and are not being mindful in that moment, a non-mindful response is likely or 100% going to be bias to your previous experiences and is likely an illusion.
It may be, it may not. It may be true, may not be true. You have to confirm or deny it according to the social reality. It's a hypothesis. It's a best guess.
Hypothesis.
Everything is. Everything is. You're run by your nervous system, and the nervous system, the integrated nervous system. I mean, you slough off skin cells every few weeks, and your digestive tract. You probably change the cells lining your digestive tract every 10 days or whatever because of the acids. Your bones, every 7 to 10 years, you get a new set of bones. The cells clone themselves and leave a replacement, and then autophagy takes them away in the bloodstream and you clear them out. So, not your neurons. You got the same 500 million neurons and 86 billion neurons in the brain that you've had your whole life. You lost a few, probably from drinking too much. If you're like me back in the day, you had a few blackouts, probably lost a few brain cells there.
Many of them.
Yeah,
not anymore.
But those hold, yes, exactly. Those hold your memories and your thoughts and your feelings. They hold them there. And so that's why the whole idea about trauma is a little bit healing from trauma and on and so forth. You can't get rid of memories. I can't forget that my father beat me with a hockey stick handle. That's not going. You can't heal that. You can understand it. You can't heal it. You don't make that go away.
I'd never considered that, but it makes total sense. Yeah, everything else, like you say, can go through this process of autophagy, and
Mm,
whereas the nervous system, yeah, but as the only thing we do have neuroplasticity in our favor. That's
mm.
the one
Yeah,
lever we
you can
can pull,
retrain
isn't it?
yourself. Yeah, you can. And so you have this situation that you're in, and you realize, okay, I have this hypothesis, and now I'm gonna confirm or deny it according to my social reality. So now you take a look at it. Like you learned to walk when you're like a year and a half. You haven't thought about it since. You just go and walk. You're on autopilot. And if you were coming to visit me, you'd jump on a plane over there and he'd go up to 35,000 feet and he'd punch in the coordinates, fly across the Atlantic, and then he would take off his seat belt, let the co-pilot keep six. And then maybe back in my day, he would have gone and flirted with the stewardesses. I don't think you're allowed to call them that anymore. They're airline attendants. And maybe he'd go and charm the people in the first class cabin, and I'm the captain. I hope you enjoy your trip. And so he'd get up and walk around. And at some point, when he got over land and close to Ottawa, a little buzzer would go off, and he'd go back into the cockpit. He'd take autopilot off, strap himself back in, take autopilot off, land the plane. I'd meet you out front. We come out here. We need a steak. That's autopilot. But the difference between you and me and that pilot is that we're on autopilot all the time. He has to push it on and off. We're on autopilot all the time. And that's why, the brain, 2% of the body, 20% of its energy. To save more energy, it puts everything on autopilot. Why do I have to learn this again? Doesn't have to learn to walk again. You already learned to walk. Doesn't think about it. And almost everything is like that. But what you can do is you can say, this pisses me off. This gives me negative affect in this moment. I seem to be falling into stickler, controller, restless, hyperachiever, I seem to be perverting my strengths under the blue skies into judgment. How can I get back over to where my gifts are and use those to manifest my life, my masculine destiny? So you can take autopilot off and you say, I'm going to do it different. I'm going to try something different. I'm going to have new thoughts, new feelings, new actions. I'm going to reboot with that. And you do that a few times and you're updating your operating system. That's how it works.
And how do we do it?
You use new thoughts, you catch it, you say, where did that come from? So I'll give you an example. Maybe I run into a difficulty and I feel like, I'm going to stand up in front of everybody at a meeting and I'm going to give a talk and oh my God, I'm going to get roasted. I'll never be prepared. And there's that one asshole who's always asked too many questions. And so you start going into this judgment thing. So then you go, wow, how does that make me feel? Oh man, I'm anxious. I could feel it in my chest right here. Oh, I could feel tension. I'm trying to avoid the whole situation. I ruined the day that this is going to go down. And I could feel it right here. I could feel the tension, or I could feel it in my shoulder, or I could feel it in my arms. I could feel it in my neck, my back, wherever you feel it. When else have I felt that way? Oh, I remember feeling like this last year when I went through something similar. Oh, and then I remember once in college. I remember in high school. I remember, and maybe you trace it back to the very first time you felt that. And then you go, that's where it comes from. Because the brain's predictive. I had a client last year who said that, she said, when I go out with a girl, a series of failed relationships, when I go out with a girl, she says, I always think that, she's going to end up realizing that I'm not all that. How does that make you feel? Where do you feel it in the body? And he traced it, did a body tracing. I feel it right here. And I said, when else have you felt that way? We went through it. And as I told him, I said, some people can go right back to the first time. Some people have to hopscotch back through their life. Oh, I remember this time. I remember this other time. I remember this time. And they slowly go back for it. He says, I know the first time. He says, it was grade 4. There was this pretty little girl in my class, and I was sweet on her. And one day she was walking towards me, and I could see her coming, and I told myself, this is it. She's going to come up and express her love for me. And she came up to me, and she said, your name is so-and-so, right? And he said, yes, it is. She says, you're friends with so-and-so. He said, yeah, I am. Would you mind telling him that I really think he's cute and I like him? And he felt it right there. He was so let down. And he forgot all about it. Forgot all about it. And then 35, 40 years later, series of terrible relationships. He's still waiting to be that guy who's rejected. And he's a handsome motherfucker, too. He's in shape. He's capable. So he got the story behind that. Now he can say to himself, I see what happens. Now when he goes out with a girl, when that thought comes into his, let's do something different. Instead of secretly putting himself down, he can say to her, I don't blame you for being sweet on me. I'm me after all. He could counter it somehow. And he does that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times and it goes away. He reboots. Like, you know what happens when you have a computer and you don't update the operating system? After a while, it circles, it just loads. It won't finish loading. Same thing happens to us. We're operating on this operating system that we figured out 20, 30, 40 years ago sometimes. We got to update it. And what do? New thoughts, new feelings, new actions. That's all you own in life. This equipment you have and I have here, somebody else will use that one day. This is what you own. You own your thoughts, you own your feelings, and you own what you do. But you take what you own, thoughts, feelings, and you reboot. You do it differently. And you do that 6 times, and now you've given the nervous system new concepts to go on in the future. So that the brain's not relying on something that you learned when you were like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And if that's healing from trauma, I don't know.
This is why therapy is I believe it's so important. We're a little bit behind in, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in the UK, we're kind of like, if you go to therapy, people go, oh, fucking hell, what's up with you? You think you must be, an addict or have mental health issues. But I think so many people can benefit from it. And
I do, but I would also say, and I've been in the field for a long time. There's not that there are many therapists that are worth their that are that good. Not for men. I don't find it.
I did. The reason I say it is because as you were telling me, this process of looking at where did the fear come from, tracing it back, it just reminded me of me doing a block of psychotherapy. I did about 4 months.
Good for you.
That was with BetterHelp. A lovely Welsh lady called Victoria, and she was great, and precisely the same sort of thing. And it was like a jealousy thing, and I traced it back about the same time at school. And I remember in the corridor someone going, oh, so and so, apparently so and so was kissing this other guy, like one of my first girlfriends, and like like you say, you kind of forget about it, but you remember it just hit you right in the stomach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at that time as well, you had no way to regulate your emotions because you're just surrounded by kids, right? And everyone's like, okay, get on with it. Time to go to
Yeah.
class.
Yeah. And
So no wonder
the
it's
nervous system grabs it. And the nervous system, your integrated nervous system denies, distorts, and represses inner and or outer reality to lessen anxiety and depression. That's what it does. It denies, distorts, and represses inner and or outer reality to lessen anxiety and depression. And it's also known as the ego. It's not the enemy. We just need to understand it. You're run by your nervous system. Conscious awareness happens milliseconds afterwards. You know, been well studied over the last 30 years with action potentials and on and so forth. And we've only really figured out in the last 10 years or so that the brain is predictive, not reactive. That's a big, big thing. You know, we're using our, and so once you get that, you go, oh, fuck, now that's where it comes from. You know what I mean? Now you can do something about it. You could update your software, your understanding. You can hold a little compassion for little Jason, you know, and off you go. I wouldn't eat beans. My mother would make me stay at the supper table till 9 o'clock at night while all the other kids, and I wouldn't eat those fucking beans. They look like dog shit to me. Brown beans. I know you UK people love them, but bless your hearts, you're braver than I am. But my missus would say, what the hell's with the beans things? Here I am, this, sort of fairly confident guy, and I won't eat beans. And then I realized one day, son of a gun, I'm so used to excluding beans from my life, I never think about it anymore. But I'm not afraid of beans. Little Chrissy was. Right? But why is he showing up and running me? I said, if you want to make beans, you want to make a chili, I'll eat your beans. So then she makes a fantastic chili. She puts 5 different kinds of beans in it. Everybody farts, like it works, and but it's delicious, but so then I realized that's where that came from. It's not me. It's not my adult me. No, so there's a part of me that's still living this programming from way, way back. So once I've eaten chili a few times, it's not an issue anymore.
Yeah, most. By the way, most people in the UK only eat. They're technically like a white bean. They're like the least, probably the least healthy one, and then they're covered in tomato sauce. But I eat black beans, and people look at me like, "What the fuck's that you're eating?"
Yeah, that's the pinto beans. The Mexicans love them.
Yeah, they're good fiber, and a little bit of
good protein. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Tell me, if you will, how do desire and fear interact?
Well, it's interesting because that's the riddle of addiction. You can't have desire without the neuromodulators. Dopamine and adrenaline always fire together. They always fire together. You can't learn without adrenaline. You may be interested in something, but they fire together. So that's the riddle of addiction. You mind if I explain that to you?
Yes, please.
So what happens
my next question. I could probably go the wrong way around.
Right. Well, that's all right. So the way addiction works is all addiction is people get hung up on the fact that people are addicted to various substances and behaviors to make themselves feel good. I think they're hung up on the dopamine. and I think they're missing something. And I discovered in 2014, I figured out the riddle, and I've used this approach with men ever since. And I have an almost 100% resolution rate, pretty close, in the 90%. And I've dozens and dozens and dozens of men. And so what happens is that all addiction is really an addiction to fear. It's not so much an addiction to dopamine, to feeling good. It's an addiction to fear, but it's masked by the feel good parts. Now, let me explain that. So you get, if you're on the road and it's a rainstorm over there, and it's a terrible storm, it's really bad, and a lorry, a truck goes by you, and you're 2 lanes, and he's a little bit too close to you. And you think, son of a gun, this guy might pass me and hit my front fender. The first thing you'll do is your heart rate will go up, your blood pressure will go up, you'll grab that steering wheel. You may even hold your breath, and you'll steer that steering wheel to make sure you don't hit the guardrails, make sure you don't hit the back end of his truck until the danger passes, and then you'll calm down. Maybe you'll give him the finger, maybe you'll say thank the heavens, whatever, but you'll get through it. That's standard fight or flight. Follow?
Mm-hmm.
Now think of when a guy's working and he's got taxes to pay. He's got, his brakes need to be done on his truck. He's got the children have to be taken here and there. He's got bosses he's got to answer, customers, co-workers. He's got all of this stuff on his mind. And it's Friday afternoon, and his buddy says, let's go to the pub, and we'll wait for the traffic to die down. We'll have a pint because we just got our paycheck. So he goes to the pub and he has a beer. Well, within 2 beers, what's happening is that his heart rate goes up, his blood pressure goes up. You see people drink a long time, they get red up here from blood pressure. But his heart rate goes up, his blood pressure goes up, his breathing changes. But more critically, he takes many thoughts and he turns them into fewer thoughts. He narrows his focus. See, and that's the relief he gets. He puts his body into a physiological fear state. A mild one, but still it's a physiological fear state. And that relieves his stress temporarily. That's what he's after. It's a fear addiction. So now that works okay, but it's got a problem. When you put your body into a physiological fear state, absent visible threat, there's no real threat. He's sitting in a pub. Or he's sitting at his kitchen table, having a few pints. And his blood pressure's gone up, his heart rate's gone up, his breathing has changed, and there's no threat in front of him. We have a predictive brain. Now what you're doing is you're training the brain to be afraid when there's no fear in front of you. And there's nothing to be afraid of. That kills confidence, slowly but surely. Over many, many years of doing that.
Why?
Because it displaces confidence. You can't be fear and confident at the same time.
You think it comes out in almost like neediness?
Well, if somebody is a regular drinker, they're hiding. They're a big scaredy cat. They might be boisterous and everything while they're drinking, right? But they don't have true confidence. It's put on. It's made up. Confidence is the stuff that takes thoughts and turns them into actions. Takes thoughts. I got an idea. I got a thought. I got something I want to do, and I go and do it. Turns them into action. And it only comes from actions. So if you put yourself into a fear state sitting at your kitchen table, you're just training your brain to be fearful. That's what you're doing. Doesn't matter if it's porn, if it's gambling. Even overeating does that to a certain extent. Because you're putting yourself into a freeze state. People eat Thanksgiving dinner all together, and they say, well, we ate so much we couldn't move. It's immobilization. It's the digestive, it's the lower vagus, the most ancient part of your nervous system. You know, you put yourself into a free, you know.
The fear state, let me just kind of recap on that. So we're in the pub. I've got all these things going around in my head. I need to do this, and here's my life stress. I have a drink. After 3 drinks or so, the noise quietens in the sort of, would that be like the prefrontal cortex quietens down?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes more fear-centered, so you're more amygdala heavy.
Yeah.
So it's like the chimp brain is taking over.
Yeah.
So you're saying we're addicted to the feeling of being in amygdala mode, and that's the addiction to fear.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's that being in that kind of state, and depending on your trauma, etc., that's been kind of stored in your amygdala, that will color how you then act out those fears.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We got that right?
Yeah, similar to that. That guy has 2 or 3 drinks at the pub, and he takes all of those. Now all he's thinking about is pizza and pussy, or maybe the game up on the giant screen. You know, he's been able to sort of take all of his issues and put those to the side, and he's narrowed his focus. He's narrowed this focus, you know. And you see this too, that it's a fear state. Guys go out to the pub on a Friday night, they get 10 pints in them, and then they want to fight everybody. Where do you think that's from? Male aggression? Bullshit. It's the fear state. You've ramped up your adrenaline. Now you see enemies everywhere. Not everybody, but there's a fair amount of guys who do that. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It's the fear state. They're addicted to fear. Gabor Mate, bless his heart, he does all this trauma stuff, and I'm not so sold on the whole trauma thing. I think it gets overblown, and I think it gives people an excuse. You know, why do you drink? Well, I have trauma. You know, why did you relapse? Well, I have trauma. You know, like wait a minute. So I think that gets overblown. But bless his heart, he wrote a different book called When the Body Says No. Right here.
Says no.
When the body says no, when the body says no. And on it, on page 28, he says, for those habituated to high levels of internal stress since early childhood, it is the absence of stress that creates unease, evoking boredom and a sense of meaninglessness. People may become addicted to their own stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, Sanselier observed. To such persons, stress feels desirable, while the absence of it feels like something to be avoided. That, to me, is the riddle of addiction right there. I wrote him about it, too, and I said, that's it right there. Right? And so we had this conversation.
Nailed it.
Yeah, that's where it's from. The rest of it is dubious, but that's what it is that if you have because now that we understand the predictive brain, if you are used to being in stress, if that's one of your default modes, sort of, let's say, if you're exposed a lot, you'll go seek it. Probably 20%, roughly, you know, unscientifically, probably 20% of us have that bent. You know, we're prone to it just because and the other thing about that is that means that person who is used to or has a facility with putting his body into a physiological fear state artificially, he can probably handle more fear than most people. You know, if there was a war, you know, they're the motherfuckers that are doing the scouting across behind enemy lines and coming back later, you know, because they're ballsy motherfuckers. So that's informal and sort of my hypothesis, but I think that they end up having they can handle more fear.
But you
It's
know what?
normal for
Like
them, you
to
know?
perhaps I'm square pegging round hole in this, but I
Yeah.
think the fear and the level of dread that I used to go through from hangovers
Mm,
is unequivocal. Like, like that's the worst thing in the world. Like
mm,
the most horrible, like, so in a weird way, I wonder if it kind of gives you some resilience. Because you've like
well,
gone through
that's
these fucking
interesting.
horrible nights of
Yeah.
withdrawal and
Yeah. Well, most people quit addictions by the age of 30, all on their own, without AA, without drug treatment, without on and so forth. They just quit on their own. And you think of it with males, it takes until the age of 25, 30 for that prefrontal cortex to come online, for the steering wheel to be fully installed. It takes us a while to mature. And most people quit on their own. They hit about 30, they're thinking, what the fuck am I doing this to myself for? Well, they may have been just drinking before because they were fear seeking. They like to put themselves into a physiological fear state because it narrows their focus, but regardless of the consequences later, and they feel those consequences the next day and on and so forth. But then at some point they wake up and say, I'm not doing this anymore. But some others don't, and they're 40, 45 and their liver's shot and they've done all kinds of damage to their lives.
it's like that addiction to the familiarity of always being on. So it's
Yeah.
like most people who have issues with addiction, they don't know how to relax. They don't know how to put
Yeah.
themselves in a parasympathetic state. And
Right.
I was the same.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't sit still without,
Mm-hmm.
I'll have a glass of wine to wind down. I could only relax
Yeah.
with beer.
Right.
And I see a lot of people like this.
That's the fear seeker.
And you, yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
to to not have like that, to not know what that feeling is like of just being kind of in that sort of serotonin mode, a beautiful walk in nature, and you kind of just like that feeling, to really know how to relax. And I think it's a big issue. I think so
Yeah.
many people are afraid of their own thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
terrified of sitting down to meditate and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And the thing
Very
is that
interesting.
it displaces confidence. So over time,
Hmm.
confidence becomes more and more elusive, and that becomes part of their shadow, their dirty little secret, and so it's really pushing confidence out of the possibility. Like if you do something like, the first time you stand up in front of a meeting at a Toastmasters meeting or give a presentation at work or something like that, if you don't die, from fright, when you leave that circumstance, you're a different person. And the next
Hmm.
time there's a wedding and you have to give a toast, you can stand up and say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. My honor today you can do it because you've practiced it. You've done it. That gives you confidence. You only get
Hmm.
confidence from actions, from doing something you haven't done. First time you go on a roller coaster ride, you're 7 or 8 years old, you're scared shitless, but you go on this roller coaster, you strap yourself in and you cross your fingers, you say, yeah, I want to go because it's kind of peer pressure. And then you go and you do the loop and you do the big drop and you come in at the end and you come off that roller coaster. The first thing a kid says is, again, let's do it again. It's changed. He's not the same kid as he was when he went on. It changes you. So it's those actions that change you. You become something more. And that's how confidence is built. Well, alcohol and drugs, all addictions displace confidence. because you're putting yourself into this fear state, absent visible threat. You know, so it just confuses the brain, and the brain says, "Well, this is fucked. Let me put myself into another fear state because at least then I narrow focus." So it becomes this thing like a dog chasing its tail. You know, at first it's kind of funny. Look at that silly dog chasing its tail. Ha ha. Then you see how pathetic it is. Doesn't that stupid dog know that that's his tail he's chasing? You know, it's funny at first, not so funny after a while, not so funny after 10 or 20 or 30 years. You know? And so that's what happens. It displaces confidence. And I would argue that men need every bit of confidence they can get. We should defend our confidence because it's really hard one. Like you, when you're in a situation and you're not confident, you feel it, man. It's painful. You know? Like you feel it. You know? So you should try to defend as much confidence as you can. You know? So
I think that's the most like unadvertised downside of alcohol and drugs would be that lack of confidence. Like that slow degradation over years and years and years. And then you turn up to a social gathering sober, and then you're like, fucking hell, I don't know how to talk to these women, or
that's right.
Because you've done it all your life with alcohol.
I write about that in Sipping Fear, Pissing Confidence. I talk about that in the introduction. About Paul, you know, using alcohol to grease the wheels a little bit, to give himself the courage to ask girls to dance. But it's not real. He can't do it without alcohol. You see? Can't do it without, unless you could do it without totally alcohol, different. You haven't learned anything. You see? And it displaces confidence, moves it aside. You know, it's incompatible with confidence.
Yeah. Three drinks in, and I'm like James fucking Bond. 5 drinks, it's an absolute disaster. But like, and also it's telling that James Bond was clearly a functioning alcoholic. So that's another.
That's the thing.
Another lesson we were being drip fed.
I don't know if I ever showed you this, but that's why I call it like this. There's a guy sitting there taking the artist that did that for me, and people, Robert and people say, "Was that you doing that, Wallace?" It's not me in the picture, but I have done that. You know what I mean? You know.
So if anyone's listening,
you know, yeah.
If anyone's listening, not watching, Chris was just holding up his book, Sipping Fear, Pissing Confidence, and it has a man, the back of the man, in all his glory, taking a leak or taking a piss. It's an interesting title, and that works out quite nicely actually, because this is my next question. I wanted to, obviously we've got to wrap up soon, but I wanted to chat a little bit about the book. What about so tell me about that name. Why this book? And what's in there that we haven't covered, that we've not gone over already?
Well, there's a bunch of stuff in that book, you know, because I talk about the riddle. I talk about the crux bamboozle. For example, one of the aspects of fear is that women tend to experience fear differently than men do. And that, you know, and the feminists will go, "Oh, this isn't true," but it's well documented. Shelley Taylor from the University of California, one of these brilliant feminists, female PhDs, realized that most of the fear studies had been done on men, and so she decided to study the female aspect of fear. And when she started off with rodent studies, as we always do, and she saw that when rats and mice were put into a fear state, they tended to affiliate. The females tended to affiliate with each other to steel themselves against whatever was the threat. Whereas the males tend to go into fight or flight. They either run away or they stand and fight. It's not 100%, but there's a tendency for the women. She called it tend and befriend. And so I make the point that if we were back in our primitive days, living in a village in the forest, and a rival gang, a rival tribe came to attack us, we could take our spears and our shields and fuck off into the woods and circle around and come back and save the day. The women can't do that. They have their children to look after. A lot of them are suckling babies. They might have grandma to look after. She's the primary caregiver wherever you go in the world. That's never going to change. So women have developed over years to affiliate and try to talk their way out of it. And so she called that tend and befriend, and it's since been replicated many, many, many times. And now they call it fawning behavior, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? Where you fawn over people. So what I try to tell people, well, you're in a club and you meet a pretty girl and she's sitting at the bar and you get a couple of drinks in her and she seems to be all sweet with you. Maybe it's not you, it's just the booze. You've just put her into a fear state in a public environment where she's going to tend and befriend. And so we want to be careful of that. We want to be defender males.
Fucking hell.
Protect our women.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say fucking hell, because I said this to one of my guys. He said, you just ruined my life. I said, sorry, brother. He says, you just ruined my life.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. This is what's going on, is we think these gals are sweet on us. But no, it's the booze, man. You put them into this fear state, and they will tend and befriend. They will fawn, and it's the alcohol. And guys probably figured this out 10 or 11,000 years ago when we started to use barley in Hungary or some Eastern European country like that, and to grow crops. And because we realized if we give this to the women, we can have our way with them, and so that's something to be aware of. I call it the crux bamboozle. We want to be defender males. We don't want to be doing that. We don't use alcohol to get girls. That's, kind of weak if you ask me.
Well, like if you're sober, and the girl that you're chatting to's had a drink, there's this kind of weird, like, discord anyways, where it's like a little bit kind of like, this isn't quite right. So that's where it's, it's something I've been like thinking about recently. It's kind of like, well, I want to talk to girls, and but it's like you've got to get to the bar early.
That's a good point. Point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does this to everybody. It puts everybody into this fear state. You've got everybody in this enervated fear state, and their heart rates are up, their blood pressure's up. It's not real. It's a manufactured situation. Everybody's half in the bag. That's not real. And people wonder why they miss red flags. So that's an unreal. The UK did a great big study, and Huberman talked about it on his podcast. Oh, it's got to be 3 years ago, 3 years ago now. There's no safe amount of alcohol. There's no safe amount. Even one drink a day is harmful. So
there's a good podcast.
It's a great podcast. I've been a long time supporter of Huberman's podcast, and so we the idea is to confidence is, you displace it. You can learn to be learned. Helplessness comes from repeatedly putting yourself into a situation where, after a while, if you drink long enough, you think confidence is for other people. It's your dirty little secret, but it becomes part of your shadow, that you hide that from other people. You just don't have any confidence, and that's not honoring the heavens. That's not honoring your choice for life, the universe's choice of you that as a chosen individual. It's poisoning it, So confidence only comes from actions. It comes from doing things you haven't done, and doing them more and more and more so that you can build up that nervous system repertoire of concepts. And so you want to protect that confidence no matter what, and the other thing is that if you've learned to drink, let's say, to a certain level where it's kind of habitual, well, you don't learn to drink through the prefrontal cortex. It's like riding a bike. So if you learn to ride a bike, you're 5, 6 years old and you ride your first bike and you go off the curb, you've got to hang on to 2 different handlebars. You got an uneven pedals. You've got to steer. You got to balance. You got to be aware of your environment, and you have to be aware of what's right in front of the front wheel. So there's like 7 or 8 behaviors that go on. And then after a few days or a few hours, you can ride a bike. And a week later, you can drive by your house, say, look, Mom, no hands. Fair to say? That's learning to ride a bike. Drinking's learned the same way. It's learned the same way. I'll give you an example. If you don't ride a bike for the next 20 years and I put a bike in front of you, would you be able to ride it? Like nothing. You might couple of wobbles and off you go. You'd never forget how to ride that bike. You can learn to ride a bike when you're 6, 7 years old, ride it till you're 10, not touch a bike for 40 years. At 50 years old, get on the bike and learn to ride and drive it. Oh, I remember this. And alcohol and drug use or addictions are learned the same way. They're not learned in the prefrontal cortex. They're learned in the pons and the striatum and the infralimbic part of the brain, the lower parts of the brain. And it's set there. And once you have it, it's automatic. That's why people go to a bar and I haven't been drinking. And all of a sudden they've got a drink in front of them. I didn't even mean to, and it was there. Or they went to the grocery store and there was a liquor store and I don't know, I bought wine. I don't know why I did that. It's because they're on automatic. Because the brain is predictive. It puts everything on autopilot. And once you learn addiction to that level, you're going to have to make conscious awareness. You bring conscious awareness to bear to defeat it, because otherwise you'll go on automatic. You're more likely to go on automatic, on autopilot, and drink or do whatever it is, the addiction that you're trying to avoid, because you've learned it in the pons and the striatum and the infralimbic center, the very, very, top of the brainstem. You never forget that. Once you get to that point, there's no going back. The people that are chronic alcoholics and then they try to learn and to drink socially, that's always a fucking clusterfuck. It's always a disaster. 6 months later, they're under a bridge somewhere sipping wine. That's how it works. It's like riding a bike. You never forget how.
It's game over.
Yeah. Once you learn it to that point,
Yeah.
And it's a fear addiction, like fear of missing out. FOMO, that's fear. As soon as you want, you're in a fear state. Wanting is suffering, one of the great philosophers said way back in the day. As soon as you want.
Is it Buddha? It sounds like a Buddha thing.
No, this is more recent. This is not Schopenhauer, his contemporary. I'm trying to think of his name. I just can't think of it right now. Get it for you in a second. But yeah, wanting is suffering. As soon as you want, you have a fear of missing out. Well, that's a fear. So you want to replace that with winning.
So how do we replace wanting with winning?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because the first thing is to understand that your wanting is your most used emotional mechanism. I want food. I want sleep. I want water. I want to work. I want sex. I want company. So wanting is your most used emotional mechanism. And if wanting is thwarted, we can use our rage mechanism to punish or correct whoever gets in the way of our wanting. But wanting is suffering, because you're always in this deficit position. You're in this FOMO position, and so you suffer there. That's not a great position to be in. You're better off to be in a winning position, where you're making good choices for yourself. You're building your confidence. You're manifesting your talents sprinkled upon you by the heavens, as I say, and to try to go off and use those. You very rarely will ever feel badly for trying to use your talents to make a difference every day. That makes sense.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, is there anything else, one biggie that we've not covered today in terms of your process and the chapters in your book?
One thing I could mention just about that too, wanting versus winning, is that you don't have free will. The idea of you having free will is a lovely notion, but it doesn't stand up to scrutiny in the neuroscience nor in human experience. What you do have is you do have the ability to bring your focus onto something and use an override system. You can be the pilot of the plane and press the autopilot off and take over the controls. You can do that. You have what V.S. Ramachandran says is you don't have free will, you have free won't. You have an override system. And you have to use your free won't.
You don't have free will, you have free won't.
Yeah, you have an override system. If you put your focus, because most of you operates on autopilot. So if you bring your focus to something and say, hey, hang on a minute, I'm feeling all this stress from my day and I'm thinking about the pub, that's so automatic. I'm aware of that now. Let me see if this happens next Friday. Sure enough. Next Friday, sure enough. I can bring my focus to that, and I can use an override system and say, why don't I go do something different? Why don't I go do a workout? Why don't I go take a Latin dance class, for crying out loud, or something, where I can narrow my focus some way. Maybe take a walk in nature. Maybe ask somebody to take a walk in nature with you. Use free won't.
And the reason that that's not free will is because eventually you will be pulled back into the rhythm.
It's the automaticity of the brain. Yeah. Because you have a predictive brain, and it uses your data bank of prior experiences to form concepts, and it uses those constantly as suppositions, as best guesses, as hypotheses in front of you. Most of us believe it. We don't have time to stop and question every single thought and feeling we have. What do you get? How many thoughts and feelings do you have in a day? Tens of thousands, and most of them are repetitive. They're the same ones over and over and over again. So if you see one that's detracting from your confidence, that's detracting from your masculine destiny, maybe you ought to look at it. Maybe you ought to put your focus on it. Exercise your override. Say, wait a minute, I'm going to try something different here. Whenever this comes up, I'm going to do this instead of that. And before you know it, you've built a new concept in your nervous system. so that it becomes automatic. I don't even think of drinking anymore. Don't even think of it. I drank for 40 years. I used to shoot heroin, cocaine, all the rest of it. Don't even think of it. I have other concepts that have replaced those now. Winning concepts. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. This has been so good. I know that there's a lot of content in that book as well, and you've clearly got like so much interesting frameworks, and your work is fascinating. So I really appreciate you talking about this, and I feel like we could definitely do a few more of these if you'd like. What if I could give you the opportunity now to send a text message limited by characters, to send it to, let's say, all the men in the world who are 21 and over, what would it read?
Oh, it would read this. I would ask them to ask themselves the question, who am I? And I would get them to say, I would ask them to think of a man must aspire to a vision of himself and commit to claiming an identity of his own, acting daily in support of his good intentions, forming habits, lifestyle, and personality. If not, he will cede control over his being to his body and his surroundings, and be cobbled together by circumstances and by others meeting their needs, not his. But who will you be?
Beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much. Where should my listeners head to if they want to learn more about you and get involved in any of your programs?
advisortomen.com is my little website. It's probably 10 years too old, but the men keep telling me, don't change it. So, it's this old antiquated sort of theme. And advisortomen.com. And of course, you can find my book, Sipping Fear, Pissing Confidence, on Audible. That's worth listening to. The first 7 chapters go over the riddle of addiction. The second 7 chapters give you additional information. It's got pretty deep appendixes, two appendixes, little short stories in it that support the book. So that's another place too. Yeah, but advisortomen.com. That's me. I'm the advisor to men. Like I said, Tony made everybody a coach, so I had to find a new name. So I said, I'll be the advisor to men. And so that seems to have stuck.
I love it. Thank you again. And yeah, all of those links will be in the show notes, so anyone listening can go and check out your stuff. But yeah, thank you again for this, and thank you for being vulnerable and tapping into your story as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Power and love to you, brother. Take good care. Bye now.
Hey guys, it's me. Thank you so much for watching that episode, and congratulations for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. A few things before you get going. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to share it with a friend or family member. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to both my guests and myself. And if you made it this far, why don't you drop me a DM?